Probably the biggest question I get asked are, what modules do I use in Foundry Virtual Tabletop? The answer, as you can see on screen, is that I use an awful lot, which is why making a video on them is kind of a daunting task. Today I want to give you guys the list of modules I use and just a quick overview of what they all do, but I don't really want this video to be an hour long, so we're really just going to breeze through these. Let me know in the comments if there's any specific modules you would like me to do a deep dive review on, and subscribe to the channel to see those in the future, as well as any other Foundry or Dungeons & Dragons content I might do. So first things first, feel free to pause the video if you don't care about my overview at all and you just want to see the list of modules that I use. I should note that I'm using the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set, and while many of these modules are useful regardless of what system you're using in Foundry, some of them are going to be dedicated to D&D specifically. So alright, with all that out of the way, let's just jump right in with the first one on the list, which is Active Auras, which is mildly useful if you like a lot of automation in your game. Essentially, it will let you create an aura effect on a token that will generate some kind of effect on other tokens within a predefined range. I use this for stuff like the Paladin's Aura of Protection ability, so anyone near the Paladin will automatically have their saving throws increased, but you can do a lot more with it than this, including creating visual auras on other people's tokens. Always HP gives you this little box right here at the bottom of your screen so that you can quickly add or subtract HP to one or more tokens. I really like it because it lets you select 10 tokens at once and subtract HP from all of them simultaneously. You can also drop them to 0 HP or bump them all the way up to full health with a single push of a button. It is super useful. Ambient Doors basically gives doors audio effects which you can change with your own sound effects. Animation Preview basically lets you see video files in the file picker which are ordinarily blank. The only issue is they're still blank and you have to hover your mouse over them for a second before the video will start playing. It is useful for session prep, but it's a bit too slow to be used in the middle of a session. Autocomplete inline properties will basically help those of you who don't know anything about programming to add some basic modifiers to weapon and spell stats and things like that. It's very useful, but a bit buggy and very finicky, and sometimes you have to really tinker with it before you'll find what you're looking for. Automated animations is cool if you want to add some visual flair to your combat. It requires you to have video files made specifically for various effects, but if you do, this module will basically call to them and activate them when a token makes an attack or uses a spell or an ability. It's very cool, but requires a ton of preparation to set up. Auto Rotate is useful if you're not using coin-style character tokens, but are using instead top-down tokens like these you see here. They will automatically rotate your characters based on what direction they're moving in. Background volume is useful if you use video maps. By default, Foundry will play the audio at max volume. This lets you configure that. This really should be a setting in default Foundry. Better Roll Tables basically gives you some extra configuration options for roll tables, such as being able to roll on it multiple times with a single click. Better Roofs gives you more configuration option for roof tiles, such as letting players see the roof tile even through Fog of War, or hiding it not just when a player token is beneath it, but even if they can see through it. It's useful, but just be warned that the guy that makes this module and a bunch of others on this list, such as Combat Booster, Splatter, Token Z, Wall Height, Weather Blocker, and very ironically, changelogs and conflicts, never actually updates his own changelogs, and so working with these modules can be very frustrating if you update often, as oftentimes the modules will either break or will develop an incompatibility with another module, but because you have no idea what has changed, your ability to troubleshoot will be made significantly harder. These are quality modules, mind you, but the hassle might not be worth it for some people, so keep that in mind. Border Control lets you hide the outline borders of tokens from players so that the tokens blend into the background a bit better. This is not foolproof, as players can still target tokens, but it's pretty neat and pretty configurable too, so that you don't have to turn off all borders. Changelogs and conflicts is a requirement of certain modules that I use. It basically lets module makers update you on their changelogs directly in Foundry instead of having to use their GitHub or whatever they use. I'd prefer it to not be a requirement personally, but it is what it is. Chat message accessibility indicators adds a tag in the chat room to identify whether a message is a whisper, GM role, public, and so on. Chat message timestamp fixes what I'd consider to be a pretty minor but annoying bug in default Foundry, which is that when you post a message, the timestamp will be something like now or 12 seconds ago or 5 minutes ago, or whatever. The point is, it's constantly updating, and frequently this message will mess with the size of the message box, causing your most recent message to slightly drop out of view. This basically causes the minor annoyance of having to scroll the window back down to fix it. This module simply changes the timestamp to the date and time, which stays static so you won't ever have to deal with this issue again. Chat portrait adds your player image or selected token image to any chat room messages you send. This is a great quality of life solution that I really wish would be default to Foundry as well, as without this, messages in Foundry's chat room just kind of blend together and are a lot harder to read. Combat Booster adds a little window beneath your token when you right-click on it that shows the last 4 items you used in your character sheet so that you can fire them off without having to go back into the character sheet. This isn't super useful as players can drag their most used items into their hotbar, and while you don't have to open the character sheet, you do still have to right-click the token to see this window, so it's not a huge time saver. Also, if you use a lot of modules that pile on extra icons to the tokens, they can sometimes overlap this window. Combat Focus keeps the chat room on the combat tracker window so that you can see the initiative order, but also see combat roles in the chat window at the same time. This is a must-have module in my opinion. Compendium Folders lets you add nested folders inside of compendiums for better organization. Custom Pause is a completely unnecessary module that I love because for whatever reason, the default white, slightly transparent pause icon is so easy to miss that I oftentimes forget the game is paused at all. It also lets me put my logo on the screen because I'm so vain. D&D 5e character monitor basically creates an alert in the chat room every time a token has an item equipped or unequipped, a spell prepared or unprepared, gold added or subtracted, and so on. Damage log does the same thing with tracking HP for characters. Personally, I find that some things are super easy to mess up in Foundry with no confirmation boxes, and especially in the case of HP, sometimes a player applies damages to the wrong token, or maybe it drops that token down to 0 HP, but they did hit 30 damage, and now you don't know if that token has 30 HP originally or 1. These trackers basically give you that written log so that you can keep track of that stuff much easier. Sadly, I also caught a player cheating once because of this monitor, changing around their prepared spells in the middle of combat. It's not really why I installed the modules, but I have to admit it's useful for that too. DF Scene Enhancement adds some quality of life improvements to scene settings and UI, like being able to navigate to a scene with a single button click, or letting players see the scene tab, and so on. DF Settings Clarity adds icons to Foundry's settings menu so that you can see if changing a specific setting will apply that setting to only your computer or to all players. This is a must-have for anyone using more than a couple of modules. DFred's Convenient Effects is super useful. Basically allows you to apply D&D effects to tokens that actually alter their tokens. So for instance, you could add bark skin to a token, instantly buffing their AC to 16. This comes equipped with tons of effects already, but also lets you create your own. DFred's Droppables lets you drag a folder from your Actors tab onto the map, and it will automatically drop every token inside of that folder onto the map, saving you time so that you don't have to individually drag half a dozen tokens one by one. Dice So Nice is a must-have module for anyone who loves the visual flair of seeing virtual dice drop on the map. These dice are super configurable and can even have sound effects on critical hits and failures, and a whole lot more. Dice Tray adds this thing to the bottom of the chat room. You can see it right here, basically making it super easy to roll dice without having to remember the code involved to do it manually. D&D 5e Drag Ruler integration we'll talk about in a second, as it combines with Drag Ruler. Drag anything to hotbar lets you drag things like character tokens to open their character sheets from the hotbar, or music files, or even music folders, roll tables, and so on, basically anything. Drag Ruler is a super useful module that adds the ruler tool to show your token's path and distance when dragging it around a map. It will also keep track of their speed, turning from green to yellow when you go past their normal speed and from yellow to red when you go past their dash speed. During combat, it will also keep track of your path and how far you've gone, even after you release the token, throughout the rest of your turn. D&D 5e Drag Ruler integration lets a token swap between their walk speed and their swim speed, or flying or climbing speed if they have those options. It's a little clunky because players have to remember to swap them with this right here, but it's a neat idea. Drag Upload lets you drag images or video files or whatever from a Windows folder directly onto the Foundry map, and will automatically add it to your Foundry folder and create an actor token or turn it into a tile for you. This is one of my favorite quality of life modules, as without it, you'll have to go through the extremely tedious process of manually uploading all of this stuff one by one. This really should be default to Foundry. Drop effects on items lets you drag an effect from one token to another and copy it there. Dynamic effects using After Effects, which for some reason is called Dynamic Active Effects by everyone, including the module maker, but not by Foundry once it's installed, used to be super useful for a variety of things like armor calculation. Now that D&D 5e's rules system in Foundry does this by default, I mostly don't use this module directly, but I know that MIDI quality of life relies on it, so I keep it around because of that. Find the Culprit helps you identify problem modules by deactivating them in chunks, so you can try to identify which one module is causing the problem. If the problem still exists, then it knows the half that were deactivated weren't the problem, and it deactivates half of the remaining ones, and on until you're left with just one. It's not foolproof, and sometimes you'll need to experiment with it a bit, leaving certain modules on, because sometimes it's the combination of a few modules that's causing an error and not just one. But for anyone using more than 2 modules, I can't recommend this one enough. Force client settings lets you force settings onto your players. This might sound mean or something, but before this module existed, I had a dozen modules that I would have to create a huge write-up for, telling my players exactly how they needed to configure them in order to get everything working correctly. It was the biggest pain in the ass ever. This module is a lifesaver. Foundry VTT Mount Up lets you place a token on top of another token, like say a horse, but it can also be used for carriages or cars or even boats, and then when you move the mount, the token attached to it will move as well. FX Master lets you create extra weather effects and special effects on the map. Okay, and with that, I think we've gotten through a decent chunk of these. I'm going to split this video into a couple of parts so that we can get through all of them without it feeling like just a 90-minute onslaught of information. So if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, leave it a like, and check back here when the next video in this series goes live. I hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you all next time.